What's going on, everybody? Wanted to do a video today about eggs because eggs are this classically controversial food where sometimes they're considered healthy, sometimes they're considered unhealthy depending on who you talk to, and there tends to be a lot of confusion centered around them. So what I want to do today is I want to talk about a particular study that just came out of Australia and talk about what they found in that study as far as eggs and cardiovascular disease. And I also want to talk about choosing your eggs and where to find healthy and ethically raised eggs and how to choose your eggs so that they are healthy and ethically raised. And then I want to end by talking about whether or not you should eat eggs, regardless of the health or what this study says, and whether or not you should include them in your diet and what to look for in yourself. So first things first, as far as the overall health of an egg and its contribution to cardiovascular disease, the old mantra was that if you ate eggs, you've got to be very, very careful about eating too many of them because they're loaded with saturated fat, and that supposedly is bad for your heart health. Well, in a recent study that came out from Australia, they took 140 people who were either diabetic or pre-diabetic. Now, this is important. If you're diabetic or pre-diabetic, that means that you have a greater risk factor for cardiovascular disease. So what they did was they separated them into two groups. Both groups were made to eat a healthful diet, meaning it contained whole foods, and overall it was loaded with vegetables and low in saturated fats, apart from the group that was eating the eggs. So both groups went off, they ate this healthy diet, and after 3 months, they took their tests. And the group that was eating eggs, I forgot to mention this, they were eating 12 eggs per day. So these two groups went off for 3 months. They ate their diets. Half the group was eating 12 eggs per day. The other half of the group wasn't. And they looked at a number of factors. So interestingly, both groups lost the same amount of weight, right? So those two factors were fairly equal. Another way in which they were equal was that neither group had their risk factors for cardiovascular disease go up. The group that ate 12 eggs a day, their cholesterol didn't go up, and their biomarkers for risk for cardiovascular disease did not go up. And it seemed like the eggs made absolutely no impact on their health. Now, a couple of notes I have to say about this study. Number one, it was funded by the Australian Egg Corporation, which is par for the course these days in so many ways. On all sides, industry is funding science, and that's true whether we're talking about vegan friendly studies, whether we're talking about keto friendly studies, whether we're talking about beef friendly studies. Regardless, they're always funded by somebody. So I wanted to mention that because it's always important that we keep an eye on this. Another thing to mention here is that with a study like this, it is of a lot greater power than what we call an epidemiological study. And these are studies where people are filling out surveys, and they tend to get a much larger N, a much larger group of people, but they're filling out surveys and answering survey questions, and those studies are based on statistics. This, on the other hand, is a randomized controlled trial and tends to have a lot more power than epidemiological studies in telling us whether or not there's actual risk factors here and allowing us to come to better conclusions. Now, so that goes into this whole debate about whether or not saturated fat is bad for you, whether or not fats in general are bad for you. And what I want to get into here is something I've been saying for quite a while. We're finding more and more these days that saturated fat does not raise your risk factors for cardiovascular disease. And there's been numerous studies published in recent times that say this. Now, as far as eating eggs and how you should go about eating eggs, first things first, I definitely recommend eating the whole egg and not just eating an egg white. I was one of these guys who back in the day would drink containers full of egg whites, raw egg whites. I'd make egg white omelets. Now there's a lot of protein in the egg white, but there's not much else as far as nutrition goes in the egg white. All the goodness happens in that egg yolk. That's where all the vitamins are, and that is where all of the healthy fats are. But when it comes to choosing your eggs, you want to make sure that those fats are in fact healthy. Now, we're seeing a lot of things on the market as far as cage-free eggs, as far as free-range eggs, and as far as commercial eggs. Let's start with commercial eggs. Commercial eggs come from hens that are kept in cages their whole life and just fed a bunch of crap. They're fed a lot of soy, a lot of grains, a lot of things they wouldn't be eating in the wild. So that means that those types of fats, the omega-6 fats that cause inflammation, that's what's going to go into the egg yolk. We also see a lot of these quote-unquote cage-free eggs. Now, there's not much difference here as far as the difference from the hens who are kept in the cages. These cage-free eggs, they might be kept in pens, they might be kept in open fields, but we still have hens who are kept in very, very stressful conditions. And in fact, in some cases, when they're out and locked in a pen, but able to roam around, we'll have situations where the hens start pecking each other, they start wounding each other, they're under a whole heck of a lot of stress, and they're being fed the same kind of crap that the hens in the cages were. So again, we don't see a huge improvement of health. So don't let that cage-free label fool you. But when you're trying to choose an egg, the best way to go about is to look for an organic, free-range egg. These are hens who are allowed to go out in the field, who feed on insects, who are going to have a much higher omega-3 content in their eggs. It's much more ethical as far as the hens go. They're not being kept in small spaces where they're pecking each other to death. They're not being kept in cages their whole lives, and they're able to roam about out in a field, feed on insects for themselves, and they have a much more healthful egg for us, the consumer. Now, I want to end this video by giving a caveat here, basically, and that is an answer to the question, should you be eating eggs? And the answer to this question is, it depends. And the reason I say this, because I know there's a lot of people out there who watch this channel who have autoimmune conditions like I do. I suffer from ulcerative colitis. Now, basic food intolerances could cause inflammation that leads to chronic disease. So if you have issues with your gut, if you're experiencing a lot of IBD or IBS type symptoms where you're experiencing diarrhea, if you're experiencing symptoms of another autoimmune condition where maybe you have rheumatoid arthritis, or maybe you're experiencing problems with weight loss and that could be related to an autoimmune condition, whole host of these factors. In these types of situations, eggs could definitely be a potential problem if you have a food intolerance centered around them. So my advice to those of you who are experiencing these types of issues is to eliminate eggs and other potentially inflammatory foods for a period of time, and then to slowly add them back in one by one to see how your body reacts. And that period of time where you eliminate them should be close to around 3 months. And a lot of people have gone into this into detail. Dr. Terry Wahls, who I've had on the Warrior Soul podcast, she has a whole system for this laid out in her book, The Wahls Protocol. There are other diets out there who are really good at doing this type of elimination if you suffer from an autoimmune disease or are suffering from some sort of chronic disease that's related to autoimmunity. So definitely check those books out. And if you are eating eggs and you don't have an intolerance to them, there's probably no reason to exclude them from your diet. Make sure that they're whole eggs and make sure that they're free-range organic eggs. I know that people out there, they love, whenever I say anything about organic, they're like, dude, that's big scam. But no, it isn't. You want chickens who are raised the way they're meant to live, out in the field, feeding on insects, and in turn, you'll get a much healthier egg. And if you're interested in learning more about different foods that you should try to eliminate from your diet for a certain period of time, if you have an autoimmune disease, I give out a free grocery list on my newsletter at www.startketoright.com. You can sign up there. We get you a grocery list. We get you 2 cookbooks. We get you a whole host of things to help you to get started on a healthy ketogenic diet and do it the right way. So if you got questions for me, as always, put them below, and I'll be back at you again later this week with another video.